Apple Blitz with Anthony Rivardo and Matt O'Leary.
What is going on? And welcome into another episode of Big Apple Blitz. I am Matt O'Leary, joined as always by Anthony Rivardo. Anthony, how are you today?
I'm doing great, man. Listen, we're only a month away from training camp. Once you get to June 20th, you're really close to like July 25th, which is where training camp usually kicks off for most NFL teams. And, I'm just really hyped up because Malik Nabers, he looked great at minicamp. He looked great at OTAs. And now he's putting that chip on his shoulder and taking aim at some of the division rivals that he'll be facing off against in a couple months. So getting really excited to see some more Malik Nabers at training camp in July.
Absolutely. And I think that's a perfect way to start because this time of year is social media beef season, and Malik Nabers is already maybe even growing fonder among Giants fans because he mentioned Trevon Diggs and the matchup going against him in the regular season. Let's break down what it is that he said and your reaction to that.
Yeah, I mean, he essentially just said if there's anybody that he wants to face off against this year, any matchup that he's most excited about, it's Trevon Diggs and the Dallas Cowboys. And Trevon Diggs, I guess, saw that, didn't like it too much, said something about how the Giants have been getting beat up for years now, took shot at the Giants, and Malik Nabers responded with some pretty interesting rap lyrics, taking aim at Trayvon Diggs. So they've kind of just been exchanging these messages at one another through social media. And it's been pretty fun to watch it unfold, and definitely adding more excitement and more intrigue to week 4, Giants versus Cowboys, those two having their first matchup of their careers.
Yeah, Giants Cowboys is always a big one, no matter where either one of the teams are in the standings. Like the rivalry games, especially in the NFC East, as we know, really means a lot. And this guy hasn't played an NFL snap yet for the Giants, but for Giants fans, they were very excited about drafting him, and now even more excited about his prospects, as he mentions a Dallas Cowboy by name. And I texted you when we were talking about topics for today, and I said I think you're gonna like my Trayvon Diggs take, but would you like to hear my Trayvon Diggs opinion?
I'm ready.
Okay, he might be the most overrated player in the NFL. Trayvon Diggs. I think he gets way too much hype. Now, maybe actually I take that back. Maybe in like 2021 he probably had that title, but now his own teammate in that same positional group, Deron Bland, might also be in the mix there too. So the Cowboys might have two of the most overrated corners. Yes, he got a lot of interceptions a few years ago, but he was also getting cooked in coverage, gave up over 1,000 receiving yards in 2021, and then 695 and 5 touchdowns in 2022. So big name. He gets a lot of interceptions, which is fun, but he also gets picked on a lot in coverage. So my take, Trayvon Diggs, overrated. How about that?
I have no disagreement with you. I have thought that Trayvon Diggs is one of the most overrated players in the NFL for years. Yes, he gets the interceptions, but he also gets burnt like toast on many occasions. Like, this guy does not stick in man coverage with the best wide receivers in the NFL. I've always felt that way. I feel like the Cowboys often like to put Trayvon Diggs on an island, and oftentimes receivers blow right by him for deep touchdown grabs. I like when Trayvon Diggs is one-on-one with the Giants' best receiver. I think that's a winning matchup for most wide receivers, number one wide receivers in the NFL. And listen, Trayvon Diggs, he does what he does well. Like, he can sit in his zone and he can be a little bit of a pick merchant, and that is definitely valuable for the Cowboys. But when he's really got to face off against top corner or top wide receivers in the NFL, I think that you take the top wide receiver over Trayvon Diggs nearly every single time. And so I'll have my popcorn ready. Week 4, Nabers versus Diggs. I can't wait for it. And I think that Malik Nabers and his route running ability, his explosiveness and speed, it's a tough matchup for Trayvon Diggs, even if we are talking about a rookie versus a veteran.
Yeah, it is going to be interesting to see those two guys go at it. I think Malik Nabers has the chance to have a really big game against him. Unfortunately, it's going to come down to if the Giants quarterback is going to be able to distribute the football. But would not surprise me if we see a couple big plays. Maybe he doesn't end up with like, I don't know, maybe we don't see like 7 catches for 150 yards, but maybe catches like 4 or 5 balls and 2 of them are like big plays, so that receiving yards total looks a little bit higher than what it actually is. But I agree with you. I like the matchup for Nabers, who is a route running technician. It's really going to come down to if the Giants are going to be able to distribute the football.
I mean, that's really what the whole Giants season rests upon, is the shoulders of Daniel Jones and whether or not he can get the ball out to the wide receivers, because I have no doubts Malik Nabers is going to be open, especially against a guy like Trayvon Diggs, who again I think struggles really badly in man coverage against top route runners. So Nabers is going to be open all season long. He should be going for over 1,000 yards, maybe even 1,200 yards. Like, I think that he should have one of those dominant rookie campaigns because of how much talent he possesses. However, it's just going to depend on how much he gets the ball. How often can Daniel Jones get it to him? How accurately can Daniel Jones get it to him? And not to just pile on Daniel Jones, it also does depend on the ball getting there in terms of him having pass protection. Is the offensive line going to be good enough for Daniel Jones? And the play calling duties, are they going to be given to Brian Dable? Is Kafka going to continue? Are the right plays being called? So while we do rag on Daniel Jones, and for good reason, because he has not proven to be some star quarterback in this league, I do think that it is fair to mention that Nabers does need to get the ball a lot this year, and Daniel Jones throwing the ball accurately is going to be a big part of that, but there are factors in play that could hold back or propel Daniel Jones this season as well.
Now, are you going to put any scratch on Malik Nabers Rookie of the Year odds? I think I saw around 1,400, plus 1,400 for him, which is behind McCarthy, Daniels, Marvin Harrison Jr., and Caleb Williams, who's the favorite at like plus 210. I don't know how old these odds are, but this is what I found on Vegas Insider.
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely throwing something on it. I'm not really a big time bettor. I don't throw a lot of money down, but I'll put a few bucks on that one because I think that Malik Nabers with that high of odds is a little bit ridiculous. I mean, he's in the Big Apple spotlight. He's super talented, and he's going to have an ability to transform a Giants offense. Like, optically, if he has a great year, it's just all of the excitement that's going to generate around him and the Giants is going to be massive. So I definitely think Malik Nabers has a very solid chance of making or of winning the Offensive Rookie of the Year award. And I think that the odds for him are a little too low.
I agree with you. I think they are lower, and maybe this might make you feel a little bit better. Garrett Wilson won it a couple years ago and had Joe Flacco, Zach Wilson, and Mike White throwing him the football. So, like, I know we talk a lot about the Giants quarterback room and how we're not super high on it, but just a couple years ago, Garrett Wilson won it, putting up 1,100 yards with a few quarterbacks who are probably not very good, unfortunately. So it's not impossible for a wide receiver to win it if they don't have a good quarterback.
Yeah, it's not impossible whatsoever. And Nabers, I think, is so talented. He's one of those players, and as we've discussed, and as you just mentioned with Garrett Wilson, I think that he's going for 1,000 receiving yards no matter who's throwing him the ball. He's so talented, and he's going to be the focal point of this offense, and he's going to get his way against some of these cornerbacks, even as a rookie, including Trevon Diggs, I think, or Trayvon Diggs, rather, I think. That's a matchup that I'm super excited for, and I think that matchups like that and a few others on the schedule get you really excited about Malik Nabers finally bringing this Giants offense back to at least an average level, and them having an elite playmaker who can go for 1,000 yards is something that they haven't had in 6 years now. Since OBJ 2018 was our last 1,000-yard receiver, the longest drought for any NFL team. So Malik Nabers should quickly rectify that error and hopefully push for that Offensive Rookie of the Year so that he can get even more OBJ comparisons and maybe even start his career off on a historic note just like Odell did.
That would be a lot of fun. Now, last thing for me, at least before we move on to our first Jets topic of the day, I think the biggest matchup that I'm looking forward to seeing is how he does against a guy like Darius Slay, big play Slay in Philadelphia. They obviously be going up against them twice a year. I think that's the matchup in the division that I'm more curious about rather than a Trayvon Diggs. And I was wondering if you felt the same or if there was another matchup that you were looking for.
Well, I'll just go out there and say I think Darius Slay is also one of the most overrated talents in
Boom.
the NFL. So Trayvon Diggs overrated, Darius Slay overrated. I mean, we've seen Darius Slay get cooked by Darius Slayton in recent years. So I think Malik Nabers is going to be able to put up a really solid fight against pretty much any of the cornerbacks in this division. Washington doesn't necessarily have the best cornerback room. Did they re-sign Fuller? I think they did. He's a good player, but even still, young, explosive Malik Nabers. I like him matching up against any of these cornerbacks in our division. Again, he's not going to go for 150 yards every single game, and I recognize that. And a lot of factors that play into that don't have to do with the talent of Malik Nabers, has to do with the talent of other players and play callers. But yeah, I like these matchups in the division for Nabers, and I'm hoping that this could finally be the year that the Giants maybe have a winning record against the division.
Oh, that'd be a lot of fun. It would make for interesting Big Apple blitzes every week. So, wanted to hop into first Jets topic of the day. The Jets signed a UFL offensive line standout in Cole Laveau. Now he played the last 2 years with the Brahmas in the UFL, and before that he went to college in Hawaii. Projects as an interior offensive lineman. He played left guard in the UFL, but in college played a large majority of his career at center. Honestly, I love the move. It's a very, very like low risk, potentially high reward. You know, if you just if he doesn't make the team and you end up cutting him, like what's the difference? It doesn't matter. But you know, trying to find some potential depth on the interior offensive line is one of the few final things that I'm looking for the Jets to do, and I'm hoping that Laveau could be that for this team.
Yeah, and not only is he depth on the inside, he played left guard, center, right guard. He also played some right tackle at some point in his career. So some versatile talent here. And I agree with you. This is kind of one of those camp body signings that low risk, high reward. If he ends up looking really solid throughout the summer practices, then you know you've just added another quality depth piece to your offensive line. And that's an offensive line that's had some injuries and been banged up in the past. So a lot of the guys on this starting five have had injuries throughout their careers. So you definitely want some more depth there if you're the Jets. And I think that taking a flyer on a UFL talent, first of all, means Joe Douglas is looking through every corner and crevice to find talent for the team. I think that's important. We mentioned that as well with Joe Shane and the Giants recently when they signed that UFL running back. But it's very important to see Joe Douglas continuing to look for ways to improve this team, not only in the starting lineup, but adding depth at important areas of need. So I do like the signing. I think, again, it's very low risk and very high reward.
Yeah, when you look at like the Jets' backup options on the offensive line, they did a good job, I think. You know, you bring in Tyron Smith and trade for Morgan Moses, and then you draft Olu Fashanu, and you have Carter Warren, who was a 4th rounder last year that they like. They have some depth at tackle, but on the interior, really their only depth is Wes Schweitzer, who started a couple games for them last year, played a lot in Washington in his career, so maybe familiar with his game a little bit. But like outside of that, you have Xavier Newman, who really just had that one really big play against the Giants last year, and that was about it for his calling card. Max Mitchell's actually listed as the backup right guard. He's played mostly right tackle in his career through 2 years and hasn't been very good. So I think there's more up for grab. Wes Schweitzer to me is really the only lock to make the roster as a backup interior player. Everything else feels up for grabs. So again, I like this addition. It's not a guarantee that he's going to make it, but it seems like a position of need and some much needed depth potentially.
Yeah, completely agree with that. And listen, I don't watch too much of the UFL, so I can't tell you how good or how bad he is. But I think, based on the stats and his success rate in pass protection, that's something that you definitely want to harness and key in on if you're the Jets coaching staff. And, kind of like you said, there's positions here for depth to be improved on this Jets team. And I do just really like the signing. And I'm curious to see once we get into training camp and we start looking at certain position battles, a lot of these position battles aren't going to be starting jobs, but we're going to be talking about who's fourth string at this position, or who's the backup for this guard spot, and all of that fun stuff. So we'll get a chance to see if this UFL signing will compete for one of those roster spots.
Wanted to give some shout outs in the chat. NY Flight Jets Talk, aka Connor, was hanging out with us before. What's going on? Thank you for joining us today. Peter from the beautiful Hudson Valley says, good signing for interior offensive line depth, but hopefully whoever is the 10th lineman doesn't have to see the field. That would be a major win for the Jets because of how many offensive line combinations, unfortunately, they were, they had to put out there last year. It would be nice for a change. The last 2 years, really, the line has been decimated with injuries. It'd be nice to get a healthy offensive line season for a change.
Yeah, and I can relate to that as a Giants fan. I mean, last year we picked up Justin Pugh off of his couch and stuck him into the starting lineup at left guard and left tackle. So I can relate. And that's why I think signings like this in this kind of slow portion of the offseason when you're gearing up towards training camp, adding camp bodies, it's important because not only does it give you potential depth, your 10th offensive lineman, you don't want him to see the field, but if he has to, he's prepared because he's been practicing with the team all summer. But it also gives you an opportunity to make a good impression on the player and incentivize him to remain on your practice squad and not take any opportunities elsewhere. So getting a guy like this in early in this offseason training period and having him around and available for the entirety of training camp, again, not only helps you get a better sense of what your depth looks like on the offensive line, but also gets you an opportunity to solidify to this guy that he belongs with New York, belongs with the Jets, and should stay on this practice squad even if other opportunities come knocking during the regular season.
Absolutely. I also like this comment from Peter. Says, hey fellas, need an overrated soundbite like the breaking news during free agency. So for the first few days of free agency, I would go live and I can play it for you even, and you should be able to hear it. So I'm sure you've watched SpongeBob at some point in your life, right?
Oh,
okay,
yeah.
so then you know what's about to come.
Breaking news!
I would hit anytime there was a signing or anything, I would hit that sounder. So I got to come up with a overrated one. I don't know if we should use our own, what we just did, like the overrated, or there's got to be someone yelling overrated in some capacity and get that sound.
Gotta be. I don't remember which sporting event it was, but I know there were overrated. Those chants, I think we've heard those at a number of sporting events, actually. So maybe we can get a little soundbite of that and use that whenever we talk about Trayvon Diggs.
Trevon Diggs, yeah, Deron Bland, big play, Slay, overrated Slay, actually.
Yeah.
All those guys.
Perfect.
But yeah, so another good note from this UFL signing. Through 2 years in the UFL, did not allow a single sack or a quarterback hit. A few pressures. I think it was 9 pressures in 12 games last year, if memory serves correct. So a good pass protector as well is something that I think Jet fans would be excited about, because that's an area on the offensive line that they've struggled with in recent years. Yes, they have some nice run blockers, like Elijah Vera Tucker is, more of a run blocker. You bring in John Simpson in free agency from Baltimore, who's more of a run blocker. Joe Titman's probably more of a run blocker. Having more of a technician, I guess, on the interior as a backup option to provide something a little bit different is also interesting, I think, too.
Yeah, completely agree. And especially when you're talking about a Jets offensive line that needs to keep its quarterback upright, I think you want to focus in on pass protecting offensive linemen. I think that's super important. And again, adding more quality depth to the back end of this roster. Like, man, I wish that the Giants had better quality depth on their roster last year when we got down to our 10th, 12th, 15th offensive lineman, whatever ridiculous number it was. Probably wasn't 15, but, it was just egregious how many backups ended up playing for the Giants last year. And a lot of them really weren't good pass protectors, and so the quarterback wasn't able to remain upright. So I think adding in some pass protecting depth on the offensive line and having a player like this throughout training camp, training with the team, I think is very important.
Absolutely. So let's get into next Giants topic now, getting into John Michael Schmidt's going into year 2 with Big Blue. You think there's some pressure on him to perform in his sophomore season with the Giants?
I think there is, because the narrative when the Giants drafted John Michael Schmitz was plug and play. He might not have the highest ceiling, but day one, he should be a good player and just continue to get better. Maybe he doesn't grow into an all-pro or a dominant center, but from year 1 till year whenever he retires, he should be a good player. Well, unfortunately, as a rookie, he was not a good player. He was very bad, very poor. I mean, arguably the worst center in the NFL, depending on which metrics you want to use. If you want to take a look at Pro Football Focus, I think he ranked second worst in PFF grade among all centers, or maybe it was dead last. I'm not sure. But yeah, John Michael Schmitz really struggled last year. To be fair to him, he was dealing with an injury for a lot of the season, and I know that hampered his ability to perform. And also fair to him, he had revolving doors of left guards and right guards surrounding him, and it's really tough as a center to continue to play well when you don't know who you're playing alongside every week. And also, to be fair to him, the Giants did fire their offensive line coach this offseason because he was terrible and was really struggling to develop talent over the past 2 seasons. So while I think there's a lot of factors that you can point to kind of say, okay, maybe I don't need to be too concerned with John Michael Schmitz and can have faith that he's going to turn it around. I do think you have to feel like there is some sort of pressure on him going into year 2, where this offensive line desperately needs to be better, and he needs to be a big part of making that offensive line better.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I like your point that you brought up with his age when he was drafted, because both the Jets and the Giants took centers last year, and there was a lot of debate between, at least I know from Jet fans, I'm sure it was the same for Giant fans, on which center you wanted them to take, and a lot of people liked John Michael Schmitz the best. And to be completely honest with you, he was my number 1 rated center in last year's draft. And Joe Titman was a little bit lower on my personal board, but like these two guys in particular, I feel like since they were both drafted in the same draft class, and then number 2 go to the same city, I feel like they're going to be compared a lot in their career, fair or unfair. But I agree. Like Schmitz was 24 when he was drafted, and the thought process was, as you mentioned, plug and play. He's someone who should be able to come in, high floor player. And unfortunately, he wasn't good, and there was that injury factor. Now, for me, I'm not, and I don't think you are either, but I'm not out on John Michael Schmitz. I think, with improved play around him, I think he does get better this year. And I mean, another example for the Giants, different position, but look at Andrew Thomas his first year. He wasn't very good his first year, and then became one of the league's best left tackles after that. So I'm not closing the door on JMS here.
I'm not closing the door on him either. And you make some really good points as well with his age. And again, it's just the expectations weren't met. Like we thought that he would just be decent from the start, and he was really bad. And that's where you kind of wonder, how quickly will he turn it around? Are we waiting for a year 2 jump? Are we waiting for a year 3 breakout? Are we waiting for the patented year 6 leap? I doubt it with John Michael Schmitz. But, you make a good point with the Jets taking Titman last year and the comparisons that will be drawn. At the time, I was like, okay, I don't know why the Jets did that when John Michael Schmitz was there. Better player, plug and play. But that didn't even end up being the case. You could argue that Titman was actually a much better player for the Jets as a rookie than John Michael Schmitz was for the Giants. So the argument of drafting John Michael Schmitz because he could be better from day one ended up being falsified. Like it wasn't a legitimate argument. He didn't prove that to be true. So in the end, the Giants now are looking at this pick like, okay, maybe we did make a mistake, I would think. But it's really going to depend on how he performs this season. And I just think that him having the pressure to perform is such an underrated storyline, because we do talk a lot about Daniel Jones being under pressure. We talk about Evan Neal for sure being under a tremendous amount of pressure. But John Michael Schmitz is under pressure too. He was supposed to be plug and play, and he wasn't. So going into year 2, when this offensive line desperately needs to improve, I mean, you got to hope and pray for like an almost unprecedented, historic year 2 jump from John Michael Schmitz compared to what his stats were last year. He has to be so significantly better this year to even reach average compared to where his play was as a rookie. But he really needs to reach at least an average level this season.
Yeah, I agree with that. He needs to take a significant jump, because now I think you could start hitting the panic button if you see similar production from him this year or similar play from him this year after 2 years in the league. Then I think you question is this just what this guy is? And is it going to end up being a bust? Unfortunately, again, bring it to the Jets side of things with Joe Titman. I thought he was okay last year. He had some nice moments, and then he also, for me, his biggest struggle was actually snapping the ball. Some of his snaps in shotgun weren't great, But I think the reason why the Jets ended up drafting him over John Michael Schmitz, and I'm curious to see how this plays out over the course of their career. One, Titman's a couple years younger, but also he was definitely the most athletic center in the draft last year, and I think they valued him, like getting out in space in the run game with Breece Hall, and I think like just trying to make it a logical assessment of why they decided to go with JMS over or Titman over JMS, excuse me. But again, it's not saying that it's for sure Joe Titman's going to be the better player at this level just based off of year one. But I would say I don't think it's unfair to say that Titman was better his first year, and I think Jet fans are probably more confident in Titman going forward than Giants fans are with JMS right now, just because of what we've seen so far.
Yeah, and I think Jets fans have every reason to be confident in Titman because he did perform so well as a rookie, and Giants fans have every reason to have a lack of confidence in John Michael Schmitz. But surprisingly, I haven't seen that. I don't think Giants fans are talking about this topic very much, not enough. There really doesn't seem to be a lot of pressure applied to JMS through the fan base. Everyone just seems completely confident and fine because he was labeled as a plug and play player who's guaranteed to be good at some point in his career. And I think a lot of Giants fans are kind of holding on to that pre-draft narrative on JMS, still trying to claim that he was this steal in the second round. But oftentimes those expectations, those narratives, they get outdated rather quickly. And so I think the Giants fans need to kind of throw caution to the wind here with John Michael Schmitz and say, hey, we've seen this before where the Giants drafted a can't miss prospect very early on and they don't perform. They don't end up becoming what we expect of them. So I think that there is need for more conversation about JMS. There should be more pressure put onto him, and the expectations for Giants fans need to change. He absolutely has to take a massive step forward this year. Otherwise, we need to talk about him being a bust going into his third season.
Wanted to go back into the comment section. Red John is already out on JMS. He says we dodged that bullet with JMS. I think that's a little premature, but I get it. Confident in his guy Joe Titman, and then our guy Johnny Boy hanging out with us. It's still early though with JMS, and also I think the New York media has been brutal on him. Would you agree? Do you think that there's been pressure on him from the media?
I don't think there's been enough, honestly. I think that the fan base has been very, very kind to him and has cut him a lot of slack. And I think that the media did as well, because a lot of the narratives that you read in the media are John Michael Schmitz struggled this year, but a lot of it had to do with the fact that everybody around him was terrible and he was hurt. So he was a rookie thrown into a bad situation. So I don't think that the media has been too tough on him. I'm sure that certain writers have. I know that Ryan Dunleavy was recently kind of writing about him and saying that he needs to step up this year and that expectations need to be higher. And I'm kind of agreeing with that. But generally speaking, I think that JMS has been treated with a lot of kindness from Giants fans. And not that I'm out here trying to say, hey, everybody needs to start being mean to him and, anything like that. But I think that the expectations do need to be risen and that John Michael Schmitz should be feeling some pressure going into year two.
Peter chimes in, says the O-line is a unit and is only as good as its worst piece. The Jets saw that with Laken Tomlinson last year, but the Giants line is certainly improved over last season. And I think that's just part of the hope right now from the Giants or from the fans, is they look at the line as a whole and go, okay, well, the guard play next to him is going to be significantly better, you would think. So as a result, you would think JMS improves. Is that I mean, I guess that's really the only logical thought behind it. But do you think that comes to fruition, I guess, this year?
I've been saying for the last 5 years, the Giants offensive line can't get any worse, so it has to get better. And somehow, some way, it gets worse every single season. So I want to say it's going to be better this year because they let up 85 sacks last year. How could they get any worse? I'll say that now, and then we're talking about it next year, and all of a sudden they surrendered somehow 100 sacks, record-breaking, terrible year for the New York Giants offensive line. So, yeah, listen, the hope is that they are finally going to improve this year. I think that they should. John Runyon Jr. is an upgrade over anyone that they had at the guard spots last year. Jermaine Illuminor is an upgrade over anyone they had at the guard spots, plus also at right tackle if he ends up playing there. And John Michael Schmitz going into year two with a new offensive line coach who's known to develop centers, in particular Andre James with the Las Vegas Raiders. yeah, every factor is there to tell you that the Giants offensive line is going to take a step forward this season. And that's not to say it's going to be a top 10 unit or anything excellent, maybe not even top 20, but it shouldn't be bottom 3. It should be better. But again, I just can't believe it until I see it with this Giants offensive line.
I totally get that. In a very similar boat with the Jets. Wanted to ask you on the Giants, what you think the offensive line combination ends up being, because it feels like it's a lock. Thomas at left tackle, JMS at center. But like, where do you think Illuminor, Runyon, and Neal end up?
So I think that Evan Neal is going to get his opportunity to maintain his starting job at right tackle. And that's going to be determined through training camp. Like if he just continues to struggle, I think he's going to have to play in the preseason and prove that he can face off against other players as well. If he just continues to look terrible, if his work ethic is poor, all of that stuff, and if he's not healthy, I think that's also an underrated talking point. He didn't participate in OTAs and minicamp because he's still recovering from ankle surgery. So if he's not ready to go at the start of training camp, first of all, probably tells you he's not taking his rehab 100% serious, because he is supposed to be ready for training camp. And I think the Giants might have expected him to be ready at some point during minicamp. So he better be ready for training camp. But if he's not, then Illuminor is going to probably take that right tackle job. Or Josh Azidu. The Giants started training him at right tackle as well during minicamp. He's been a guard for the Giants and played a little bit of left tackle last year. Now they're trying him at right tackle. So it's really tough to pinpoint exactly what this offensive line is going to look like. But so far at minicamp, the starting 5 has been Thomas at left tackle. It's been Illuminor at left guard, John Michael Schmidt at center, Runyon at right guard, and Evan Neal at right tackle. So if that ends up being the final starting 5 going into the regular season, again, I can't overstate how much pressure is on the shoulders of John Michael Schmidt and Evan Neal with that starting 5.
I agree. And I was looking at the our lads depth chart. That's what they had it. What you just listed off: Thomas, Illuminor, Schmitz, Runyon, Neal. Part of me is a little surprised that they don't have Illuminor at right tackle, because I think he played so well at right tackle with the Raiders the last couple of years. So that surprises me a little bit, but I also kind of get it, like the pressure of, continuing to stick your first round pick who you drafted to play right tackle at that spot.
Listen, I don't really understand why we haven't seen any Jermaine Illuminor at right tackle through OTAs and minicamp. I thought that's been a very strange development on this Giants offensive line. And on top of that, I thought he would be playing right guard and not left guard. That's another layer to that is John Runyon Jr. has been very vocal in the media that he's more comfortable playing left guard. And if you look at the stats, it backs that up, because throughout his career, his stats in terms of pressures and PFF grades, or pressures allowed and sacks allowed, all of that stuff, his stats are so significantly better when he plays left guard versus when he plays right guard. So the assumption was going to be that Jermaine Illuminor would play right guard and Runyon on the left side, since that's where they're both more comfortable. But for some reason, the Giants have that flipped the other way around and don't seem to plan on changing it. So I don't know if that's a precursor towards the terrible play that we're going to get from the offensive line this year, or if maybe it's a little bit of Brian Dable evil genius planning. Remains to be seen. But again, because of what I've seen from this offensive line for the last decade, I have to think the worst. I'm not really too sure why this is the way that the offensive line is configured.
Absolutely. I'm with you. I think I was a little confused by that one as well. So anyway, we'll see how JMS does going into year 2. Final topic of the day. I was on Bleacher Report earlier and saw an article that had like 7 different wide receiver trades, and one was the Jets, and we had to talk about it on the show today because I just really don't get the logic behind it. Their recommendation was for the New York Jets to trade with the Buffalo Bills, who's a division rival, for Marquez Valdez-Scantling. I don't know. Like when he was a free agent, that was a name that got brought up a ton because the Aaron Rodgers connection, obviously. And the point of the article too had to do with like reuniting past, quarterback duos. But why would Buffalo sign him in free agency to just trade him before the season starts in the division? Not even like just trading him after signing him to begin with is bizarre, but then trade him to the team that probably is going to give you the biggest run for your money for the division is just weird behavior.
Yeah, I do have to preface this and say, not to like belittle any sports media outlet, because I'm also part of a sports media outlet, so I know how tough it can be sometimes to find topics to write about. But Bleacher Report consistently drops the worst mock trades ever. Like, I've never seen anything like it. Day after day, we're seeing just some of the Knicks mock trades that I've seen this offseason have just been disgusting. This one about the Jets is just, it's nonsensical. Like, it doesn't make any sense when you really sit and think about it. And I think what's happening here with the Jets, and I think it's been happening for quite a bit, is anytime a player hits free agency or is not going to make a roster or is on free agency and they have any kind of connection whatsoever, minor connection to Aaron Rodgers, just because of like the Allen Lazard signing and a couple others, familiarity signings with Aaron Rodgers, anytime someone becomes maybe available with a connection to Rodgers, the media is just so quick to say, oh my God, the Jets have to pick this guy up. And I think it's ridiculous. It doesn't always work. Now it's like you're shoehorning in a narrative to fit, and it really doesn't make any sense. Marquez Valdes-Scantling, why would the Jets trade for him? Why would the Bills trade him to the Jets? There's not really a good answer for either one of those questions. And overall, I think this is, like I said, a very nonsensical mock trade.
Right. And like, I'm not against, and you're not, with what we both do, whether on the website or on YouTube, like talking through different scenarios for teams is fine. I'm good with hypothetical scenarios or trade ideas. But like, can they make a little bit of sense? Like the Jets going out and trying to add more wide receiver depth because like you have Mike Williams coming off an injury, and some young guys in Malachi Corley, Xavier Gibson, Jason Brownlee, how bad Allen Lazard played. Like you can make a case that the Jets should look to add another wide receiver, but like again, why would the Bills, who are in the same division, just trade him? And their argument was, well, if he's not going to make the roster and they just cut him, they would save a little bit of money if they were to trade him for a late, a late day 3 pick or whatever it is. But I just don't get the connection. The only connection is, as you said, that he had a cup of coffee with Aaron Rodgers in Green Bay.
That's it. That's all that it is. I mean, the media is just so obsessed with trying to connect Aaron Rodgers with any of his buddies through free agency trade that they just come up with these ridiculous proposals. And I also think another reason to argue why the Jets shouldn't make this trade, they've got enough receiver depth. Like, sure, there might be room for an upgrade and room for improvement. And that's why we've kind of talked about maybe Darius Slayton gets traded to them midway through the season, which makes infinitely more sense than this mock trade. But I think that there are young talents on this roster. Xavier Gibson, Malachi Corley, give them those reps. Don't just trade for Marquez Valdes-Scantling and take those training camp and practice reps away from your younger talent for no good reason. They're not. Marquez Valdes-Scantling isn't going to be the long-term answer like a couple of these younger guys are. They need the practice reps and they need the regular season reps as well, even. So it just, every level of this mock trade just does not make any sense. I can't get behind this one, and I can't understand how mock trades like this continue to get pumped out by such big media outlets.
I don't get it. I do think, though, and I'm pretty sure we talked about it on the show already at some point, was if the Jets make an in-season trade for wide receiver, that would not surprise me. We mentioned Darius Slayton as a potential option for the Jets. Like a move like that in season around the trade deadline, okay. Training for MVS in training camp or trading for any wide receiver in training camp is something that I just don't see. I don't know if we really see any big time trades for a while now. Do you think we get any, not even just Jets or Giants, in NFL in general? Do you think we see any trades here in the next couple months before the start of the season?
I do actually. I think that usually in training camp, there's one, maybe two. I'm not saying any massive blockbusters. However, there is one that kind of looms large, and that is Brandon Ayuk. So I could
Okay.
see Ayuk getting moved during training camp. He gets back into the building with the 49ers, has some more negotiations, says, F it, I don't want to be here anymore. Trade me. And they're like, okay, fine. And they move on from Brandon Ayuk. I could totally see that happening. I don't know if there's anyone else that I could see that happening to. You could argue maybe T. Higgins. He just signed his franchise tender, so maybe he gets moved on that franchise tender. that's possible, but unlikely. So I would say Ayuk or bust for blockbuster trades during training camp. But at the end of the preseason, when all of those teams go through their cuts, oftentimes you do see some players get traded rather than cut so that teams can get these guys before they hit the waiver wire. So we'll see some trades. Just I don't think there's going to be anything too crazy.
Yeah, Ayuk's a good name to call out there. I think they probably would want to trade, I think, Debo more. But I don't know who wants to take on that contract after the last couple of years that Debo's had. So that maybe San Francisco's an interesting one for a potential trade. But I don't know. I'm not just for this one. Thought it was weird. Said, all right, let's talk through this and maybe poke a little bit of fun at it. But strange times.
Strange times indeed. And again, I think that's just a product of this being that slow period in between mini camp and training camp. Sometimes people want to find something to talk about. Sometimes they do a good job of it. I think we do a good job of it. Other times, some outlets just have no idea what they're talking about and just coming up with anything to drive home some clicks. But yeah, Marcus Valdes-Scantling, can't imagine it happening. I think if anything, like you said, Jets making a trade during the regular season if they have any injuries or if they feel they need to upgrade. And I think Darius Slayton still makes a lot of sense for him.
Absolutely. But Peter chimes in with it. I think this is a good one to close out. Could have just re-signed Mims. I don't know if you saw Denzel Mims, former Jet second round great from the 2020 draft class. He just signed with Jacksonville's practice squad. So we made the comparison that he has 9 lives, like a cat. He won't die. He just keeps kicking around in the NFL.
Yeah, that's a player that I thought had so much potential coming out of college. Really liked the pick for the Jets. I'm sure that you felt the same way, and a lot of Jets fans did. Can't believe that he just hasn't found a solid home and hasn't panned out in any way, shape, or form. But he's going to keep finding different teams to play for, apparently. Like you said, 9 lives. He's somehow, some way unable to be put down for the count.
Couple Johnny questions before we close. For Anthony, I low-key think the Giants have a good wide receiver core. It's kind of scary, honestly. We've talked a lot about the depth in that Giants wide receiver room. I know you agree with this one.
Yeah, this is one of those kind of narratives that I'm really building this offseason. I think that the Giants having 4 solid starters in their receiving core, I don't know how many teams you can name that really have that. Like you're talking about having at least 2 guys in there that I think have 1,000-yard receiving potential. Again, at least on different teams and different circumstances. I think you could argue that all 4 of Malik Nabers, Jalen Hyatt, Darius Slayton, and Wan'Dale Robinson would have the potential to be 1,000-yard receivers in the right situation. But at the very least, all 4 of those guys are 500 plus to 750 plus yard receivers for the Giants. And I think that's something to be super excited about. So I love this Giants receiving core. They have a lot of depth. And even when you get past those top 4, Allen Robinson is hanging around on this roster. That's a really quality veteran. You've got Bryce Ford Wheaton, the undrafted free agent from last year with a ton of talent. I really do think that this Giants receiving core is super underrated and has potential to be among the best in the NFL as long as they get the ball in a timely and accurate manner from the quarterback.
There we go. And Matt, who do you think the Jets wide receiver 3 and 4 will be? So we talked a lot about Xavier Gipson in the last episode. I think it's going to be, I think Corley by the end of the year ends up being wide receiver 3, but I do think Gipson kicks around and ends up ahead of Allen Lazard. I know a lot of people pencil Allen Lazard in there for the Aaron Rodgers connection and because he's an outside receiver and both Gipson and Corley are kind of exclusive slot guys, but I think they split the time and I think Lazard is just going to end up being, inefficient again and a healthy scratch like he was at times last year. So I'm going to say Corley and Gipson. Any thought on that one?
I think you're 100% right. Those guys are popping off at minicamp. And I think that once we get to training camp, once we get to preseason, we get to see Corley run over some dudes. I think that's when he's really going to make a name for himself. So, yeah, I'm with you. I think those are going to be WRs 3 and 4 for the Jets.
All right. That is going to do it for us on this episode. We will be back again on Monday for another episode of Big Apple Blitz. Make sure to subscribe to Fireside Giants for daily Giants content. You can find my stuff over on Talking Jets or Matt O'Leary and why. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'm Matt. He's Anthony, and we'll catch you next time.